for this Shavuot webinar for rabbis. Where is Halakha from? Revelation in Modern Jewish Thought and Law with Dr. Yonatan Brafman. Before we begin, I want to just highlight a few other upcoming programs for you. We're really excited about our Rabbinic Summer Conference this year. It's called Beyond the Chuppah, a rabbinic learning conference on working with interfaith families in mid-July, and combining textual and practical and pastoral approaches to the challenge that we all have of interfaith families in our communities and making them feel welcome and a part of things. We've also just opened registration for the Rabbinic Training Institute in January. Those two programs are for conservative rabbis only. The rest of our rabbinic programs, all of our online programs, are open to all rabbis. We're hard at work on next year's programs, and you will hear about those from us soon. The programs that are already open, you will hear about in the follow-up email to this webinar, and we're also going to send you a really cool treat. We just made a 2-minute video Dvar Torah for Shavuot featuring rabbinical student Leora Perkins, who's the daughter of our colleague Carl Perkins. So that will be some extra Shavuot Torah in addition to today's webinar. All right, so I wanted to acknowledge the other JTS staff here in the room with us, our colleague Rabbi Tim Bernard, Director of Digital Learning and Engagement, who organizes these webinars for you, and our great new media staff, Larry and Brian. Thank you. The program today will last about 75 minutes. If you haven't already printed the sources, you should download them using the link above the video. It's a lot of sources today, but don't worry. Professor Brafman will help us through it all. He will answer specific questions as needed during the webinar. If you have a clarifying question that's kind of preventing you from understanding, go ahead and ask us that, and then we'll have a period for general Q&A at the end. Submit your questions in the chat window below the video at any time. And if you're having some problem with the chat window, you can also email them in rabbinicresources@jtsa.edu, rabbinicresources@jtsa.edu, and please put webinar question in the subject line. But the chat window is the best, and we'll try to get to as many questions as we can. Okay, I'm so pleased now to introduce Professor Brafman. Dr. Yonatan Brafman is Assistant Professor of Jewish Thought and Ethics and Director of the MA program in Jewish Ethics at JTS. His research focuses on the intersection of Jewish law, Jewish thought, and contemporary moral and legal philosophy. He also studies the implications of religious practice for critical social theory. He's the co-editor of Jewish Legal Theories, an anthology published earlier this year, and he's currently working on a new book entitled Critical Philosophy of Halakha. He holds a PhD in philosophy of religion and Jewish thought from Columbia, where he also received his BA, MA, and MPhil. He has held fellowships in the Department of Religion at Princeton, the Tikva Center for Law and Jewish Civilization at NYU Law School, and the Center for Jewish Law and Contemporary Civilization at Cardozo School of Law at YU. He's taught philosophy of religion and Jewish thought and ethics at Princeton, Columbia, Yeshivat Hadar, Yeshivat Kotel, and since Professor Brafman joined us at JTS a few years ago, he's taught many very popular courses to our students, undergraduate, rabbinical, graduate, but this is his first webinar with us, so you're in for a treat, and thank you so much for doing this.
Well, thank you for having me. So as was mentioned today, we're going to discuss where halakha is from, revelation in modern Jewish thought and law, and we're going to look at a number of positions and models. So our discussion today is going to be packed with different sources and different approaches that I think will be useful for thinking through this crucial topic and for sharing with our communities. So in the liturgy, as you know, Shavuot is known as Zman Matan Toratenu, the time of the giving of the Torah. So this therefore raises the question of how, from the revealed Torah, the divine word of God, does practical changing and disputed halakha result? How do we go from this word of God to something that we human beings are doing? So this question implicates a range of other questions, including what exactly was revealed, the written Torah, the oral Torah too, and what is the oral Torah? What's the relation between the written Torah and the oral Torah? How should the Torah be interpreted? And how does that relate to rabbinic authority? So here's the roadmap that we're going to be using for investigating these questions. First, we're briefly going to look at three classical rabbinic positions on revelation and oral Torah. We're going to look at one position in which written Torah is complete and perfect, and the oral Torah is some sort of retrieval of that original, complete, and perfect written Torah. The second model we're going to look at is oral Torah as a continuous process of revelation. Right? So the idea is that revelation isn't a one-time event, but it's something that's ongoing. And lastly, we're going to look at written Torah as revealed potential and oral Torah as actuality. So moving from a potential that's included within the written Torah and that's actualized through the oral Torah. So that's just the first half. Those are the classical rabbinic positions. Then, focusing on this last position, the idea of written Torah as potential and oral Torah as actual, we're going to look at three ways that modern rabbinic thinkers attempt to model that position. One, where oral Torah is politics. The second, where oral Torah is a type of technology. And a third, where the oral Torah is in fact a form of textuality, a way of relating to text and interpreting it. So we begin with the three classical rabbinic positions on revelation and oral Torah. And here I'm drawing from the important work by Yochanan Silman in his book Kol Gadol V'lo Yasaf. And this is on the handout on the first page. So the first model, the first position we're going to look at is in which revelation is complete, and the process of the oral Torah is one of retrieval of this complete revelation. This position is put forward mainly in the Yerushalmi, in Peah, deriving from a pasuk in Devarim. So it says, "Vayitain Hashem Elai et shnei luchot avanim, kituvim be'etzba Elokim, va'aleihem kichol hadevarim asher diber Hashem imachem bahar mitoch ha'esh b'yom hakahal." Right? And the Lord gave me the two tablets of stone inscribed by the finger of God with the exact words that the Lord had addressed to you on the mountain out of the fire on the day of the assembly. So the Yerushalmi notices some interesting textual abnormalities in the verse. And he quotes Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi as saying, Amar Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, Amar alehem ve'alehem, kol kichol, devarim hadvarim. So in each case there seems to be a superfluous particle. And Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi derives from this, Mikra, Mishnah, Talmud, Va'agada, Afilu Masha Talmid Vatik Atid L'Horot Lefnei Rabo, Kvar Ne'amar L'Moshe B'Sinai. So not only was the written Torah given, but Mishnah, Talmud, Agada, and even what a conscientious or a veteran student will one day ask of his teacher was all given at Har Sinai. It was all revealed. So this is a maximalist view of revelation. Continuing on, it says matam, so how do we know this? Or what's an additional support for this? And it quotes Kohelet. Yesh davar sheyamar adam ra'ei zechadashu. Right, so quoting Kohelet, one person is going to say, here there's something new. Meshivo chaviro, his friend will reply to him, v'omer lo, kvar hayal olamim. So the idea here is that there's nothing new. The idea is that every aspect of oral Torah, things that we know have been written later, like the Mishnah, the Talmud, even what the innovations that a later student derives, were all given in this one revelation. So this is the idea that revelation is complete. And the way that this view understands debate and conflict within the rabbinic tradition is one as retrieval, trying to get back to that pre-existing perfect revelation. The second model is really on the other extreme. And this is that there wasn't one-time perfect revelation, but there's a continuous process, starting with the written Torah and continuing through the oral Torah, one continuous process of revelation. And here, this view is developed by the Gemara in Sanhedrin, reading two verses, one from Bamidbar and one from Devarim against each other. The verse from Bamidbar, Vayered Hashem ba'anan v'yidaber elav, V'yatzel min haruach asher alav, v'yiten al shivim ish hazikenim, v'yihi kinoach aleim haruach, v'yitnabu v'lo yasafu. Then the Lord came down in a cloud and spoke to him, to Moshe. He drew upon the spirit that was on him and put it upon the 70 elders. And when the spirit rested upon them, the elders, they spoke in ecstasy, and here's the crucial phrase translated here as, but did not continue. So the idea is that the elders received some of Moshe's divine inspiration, and seemingly, at least according to the text, they did not continue. Turning to a seemingly unrelated verse in Devarim, Et Devarim ha'ela diber Hashem el kol kalachem, bahar mitoch ha'esh ha'anan v'harafel kol gadol v'lo yasaf, v'yachtavim al shnei luchot ha'avanim v'yitnem elai. The Lord spoke those words, and here is the crucial phrase in this verse, those and no more, in this literal translation, to your whole congregation at the mountain, with a mighty voice out of the fire and the dense cloud. He inscribed them on 2 tablets of stone, which he, God, gave to me, Moshe. So, the Talmud is discussing this first event of the endowment of the Zikanim with the spirit of some of Moshe's divine inspiration. And it quotes Mar as saying, Amar Mar, Kol hanavim kulam nitnabu v'pasku, v'hein nitnabu v'lo pasku. Right, so as you may recall, the elders are brought to Moshe and they begin to prophesy, but there are 2 individuals, Eldad and Medad, who remain in the camp, and they also prophesy. So with that in mind, the Gemara thinks about this verse and says all of the Nevi'im, in this case these Zikanim, prophesied and then they stopped. V'hein, Eldad and Medad, nitnavu v'lo pasku, they did not stop. They continued to prophesy. Manalan de pasku, how do we know that the Zikanim stopped prophesying? Right, if we're going to say that it's from the verse that we just looked at in Bamidbar, Elameata kol gadol v'lo yasaf. Right, but we know that we also have that same phrase in Deuteronomy. Hachinami de lo asafhu? And the Gemara asks, should we interpret Deuteronomy, the description of Revelation in Devarim, as also meaning that it stopped? Ella de lo pasaku. Right, so here it's focusing on this question in Bamidbar, but what it assumes is that in Deuteronomy, this idea of the lo yasaf cannot mean that they stopped, but rather it means that there's a continuation, that de lo pasak. Right, and it derives from that back to the Zikanim. But for our purposes, the important point is that assumed here is this idea that revelation at Sinai is a continuous process and not one that stops, contrary, in fact, to the literal sense of the verse. So here, in contrast to the first view that we looked at, where revelation is a one-time event and is perfect and self-enclosed, here, revelation is a continuous process beginning with the written Torah, but then continuing almost without limit. So those are the 2 poles. What we're going to focus on in our discussion is this last view, both as it's presented in classical rabbinic literature and as it's continued in modern. The third view is where the written Torah is a revealed potentiality and the oral Torah is some sort of actualization of it. And this is a very famous Agadah, and it's going to be even more interesting to see how it's interpreted by modern rabbinic thinkers. Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav, B'shah she'ala Moshe l'marom, matzu la'kadosh baruch hu sheyoshev v'kosher kitarim lotiot. So the famous story where Moshe goes up to heaven and he sees God tying crowns on the Torah. And here I'm asking you to think again about this story, which you might be very familiar with, because the last source in our whole discussion is going to make some significant distinctions from it. But Moshe goes up and he sees God tying crowns on the Torah. Amar lefanav Rabbona Shalom mim akiv al yadecha. Right. So he says to God, "Who stays your hand, or who prevents you?" Amar lo, God replies, Adam echad yesh atid lihiot besof kama dorot, va'Akiva ben Yosef shemo. So there's going to be a man named Akiva ben Yosef, shatid ledrosh al kol kotz v'kotz talin shel halachot. That's going to, from these crowns, make piles and piles of laws. Amar lefanav. So Moshe says back to God, Rabbonu shalom harehu li, show him to me. Amar lo chazor lacharecha. So return behind you. Halach v'yashav b'sof shmona shurot v'lo haya yoda ma hein omrim. So Moshe goes to the back of Rabbi Akiva's classroom, and he doesn't understand what they're saying. Tashash kocho. And he gets upset. Kevan shehegia ledavar echad, when they got to a certain matter that they were studying. Amar lo talmidav, Rabbi minayin lach. So they say, how do you know this? Where are you getting what you're telling us? Amar lahen, Rabbi Akiva said to his students, halacha l'Moshe misinai. It's a law from Moses on Sinai. Nityashav dato. And then Moshe is calmed down. So in comparison to the two previous positions, this one sees a complex relationship between the written Torah and the oral Torah. It's not the first model where the oral Torah is already there and explicit in the written Torah. And it's not the second model where there's just a fluid continuity. Rather, it's one where there is a written Torah that indicates or points towards something else. And then there's a process of deriving or explicating, right, the oral Torah out of the written Torah. And so there's some sort of potential in the written Torah that then is actualized through the process of the oral Torah. So as I said, what we're going to now look at is modern rabbinic models of this relation in order to understand the process of halachic determination. So we're going to jump over 1,000 years, beginning with the 18th, 19th century, to think about how did modern halachas and Jewish philosophers try to tease out how do we understand the relationship between the actualized the potential within the written Torah and its actualization as oral Torah. So the first figure I want to look at is Nachman Krachmal. Nachman Krachmal, as we'll see, models this process of explication as on the basis of politics. Krachmal is a little-known figure presently in Jewish thought, and that's really a shame, because, in fact, many of the tendencies that we follow in, that we hope to build upon, especially here at JTS, derive from his work. Krachmal lived from 1785 to 1840, and his major work was called Moreh Nevuchei Hazman, which is obviously an echo of the Moreh Nevuchim, but in contrast to Maimonides and his attempt to provide a synthesis between Aristotle and the rabbis, Krachmal is trying to provide a synthesis between the rabbis, historical scholarship, and Hegelianism. And one of the things he's thinking about is, in light of the fact that we are aware of the development of Torah, of Judaism over history, how do we understand Jewish theology and Jewish life? And his view on the oral Torah is a crucial part of that. So he begins his discussion by looking at, again, the Talmud reflecting on a biblical verse. So in Shemot it says, Vayomer Hashem al Moshe, K'tav lecha et hadavrim ha'ela, ki al pi hadavrim ha'ela karati itcha brit v'et Yisrael. And the Lord said to Moses, write down these commandments, for in accordance with these commandments I make a covenant with you and with Israel. So the Gemara picks up on two strange things in this verse, or two aspects of the verse that seem to conflict with each other. Darish Rabbi Yehuda bar Nachmani, mitorgamana de Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish. So Rabbi Yehuda bar Nachmani, the expounder, interpreter of Shimon bar Lakish, explained, K'tiv, kitov lecha et hadivrim ha'ela. Write these words. V'k'tiv, ki al pi hadivrim ha'ela. Right, so the verse has this language of writing, k'tav, but it also has this language of orality, al pi. So how is this possible? What is the nature of Torah? Is it a text, or is it something oral? Ha-ketzad. So how is it possible for these two things to be combined? He answers, Devarim shebechtav iyata rashai l'omran al peh, Devarim shebal peh iyata rashai l'omran b'chtav. So those things which are written, you cannot say orally, and those things that are oral, you cannot put down in writing. Devei Rabbi Yishmael Tana Ela. So Rabbi Yishmael adds to this. It says Ela ata kotev. These words, the written Torah itself, you can write down. V'ata kotev halachot. But you can't write down halachot. So in both cases, both of these interpretations of the verse, it's focusing on that there are certain things that need to stay written and other things that need to stay oral. And there's a further connection between what needs to stay oral and halacha. And this is the starting point for Nachman Krachmal's understanding of oral Torah and halacha. So the Hebrew here is a bit difficult, so we also might make recourse to the English translation that I have on the following pages. He writes, Kvar mechayev haseichel shekol nimus kolel hanitan lekibutz shalem leklalo velchalkav velepratav hainu sheyesh bo hanagat chok umishpat gam leklal ha'am gam lechol tzibor v'mishpacha v'gam lehayachid v'yisiko umikurav Ef shar sheyifrosh v'yavor bo kol hapratim kulam shehem be'emet ein kates. Right. So the interesting thing is that he starts off by not discussing Torah, written, oral, or otherwise. He's discussing nimus, a nomos, law in general. And what he's saying is that any law that's given to a collectivity, an entire people, right, and that attempts to govern their whole lives, it's impossible for all of their details to be derived and explicated because in truth they have no end. Rather, אלא יהיה מן ההכרח שיבוא הכל כללים באופן שכל הפרטים העתידים לבוא בהמשך זמנים יכנסו תחת הכללים ההם. So, not everything can be spelled out, but rather there needs to be general principles that will allow one to grapple with the changing times and eventualities. ולא זה בלבד, אלא שאם יהיה הנימוס ההוא מונח בכתב מתחילת נתינתו, אי אפשר שירשמו אפילו המשפטים הכלליים הנזכרים. Right? And even if we accept this idea that there's going to be a spelled out law and there's going to be general principles, these general principles themselves can't be written down. Why? Ki'im al derech miyuchad, because that would only hold under certain circumstances. Rotzel amar lefi hatzorach ve'esek v'derech ha'chayim v'amakom hamushav shel hador hahu shehunach etzlo klot hanimus b'chtav. Because even if we have recourse to general principles, if we spelled out those general principles, it would still only make sense in terms of a circumstance that's fairly similar or that resembles the time of the original giving of the law. ויכרח לפי זה שיונח ביד אותן שבידם ניתן הנהגה של הנימוס, כמו כן איזה דרכים איך לבאר גם את הכללים ההם המונחים. בזמן ובמקום ודרך חיים משונה הרבה מכמות שהיה בדור הנחת הנימוס ובדורות סמוכים אליו. So, in addition to the general principles, there's also going to have to be general ways of applying those principles. And these themselves can't be written down on kind of a pain of an infinite regress. Right? So we have the written law, we have general principles, but even those general principles, we need to have flexibility in how to apply them. So there needs to be ways to use the general principles to apply the law, and it's impossible for those to be written down at all. V'nakesh, this is continuing on, V'nakesh v'nomar od, so he's going to elaborate this. Shoto hanimus kefi ma sheyeh kolel gam ne'arach la'anshe hador harishon v'hasmuchim, efshar v'gam roi heoto munach v'naton b'chtav, b'chdei lehitparsem b'rov hatikot, l'chol ba'alei hanaga v'hanimus hahu. So granted that the law itself is going to have to be written down, ach lo kein darchei hotzat hapratim min haklalim, afilu b'zman rishon, v'af ki darchei hakesh ben ענייני זמן קדום לזמנים האחרונים והשתנות הנופלות במרוצת העיתים, כל אלו אין מן הצורך ולא באפשרות כלל שיונחו בכתב בתחילת סט הנימוס. So this is again re-emphasizing that even if we have a written law, and even if we have general principles, and even if those need to be known to the people that are going to put the law into practice, the general ways, the approach, the manner in which you deploy the principles can't be fully codified. And that needs to be something that is held by those who are charged with adapting the law to changing circumstances, but it can never be fully publicized. Recall that until now, for Krachmal, we've only been talking about political law. We've been talking about nimus in general. We have not yet gotten to discuss the Torah. Skipping to the next paragraph, to the bold, he says, "V'im yehei kol zeh b'nimus midini," if this is the case with political law, שהדקדוק בו אינו מצווה כל כך, והשינוי לפי הזמן אינו מוזהר, right, in which the details we don't have to be so concerned about, and we're not so worried about it changing, ועל הרוב הגדול אינו מתפשט כלל על כל מסיבות חיי הפרטים, and also it doesn't apply to all areas of life, ובטבעו אינו נמשך ומתמיד זמן ארוך כל כך, Ad hitafok ha'itim b'korotam min yasod v'ad harosh, and also besides they don't last that long, right? And if all of this is the case, that we have to worry about codifying things and writing them down, ma yehei hadavar etzel nimus eloki. How much the more so when we turn to divine law. Right, and just skipping a few lines. Kol shekin sheyuchrach bo mitchilat nitinato kabbalah u'mesira lemahanigav v'shenitchayev lo kol ma shezechranuhu. Right? How much the more so is it going to be necessary that those that are responsible for applying the law under changing circumstances will have this general praxis, right? Not a codification, but a manner, a habit of applying the law. V'hinei zu hi achat mipinot emunatenu, sham milvad hatorah hametzuya biyadenu b'chtav, ba'u ima u'b'shavoi archa, k'mokein devarim mekubalim ba'al peh, shehem gam kein Torah. Right, so on the basis of this analysis of political law and its comparison to divine law, Krachmal argues that it's going to be necessary for there to be an oral law. And by this, what he means is not, again, a code, but rather a practice of application, a practice of tailoring by the political leaders of the Jewish people in order for Jewish law and the Jewish community to continue over time. Kol zeh hanaseh b'chlal l'chachmeinu b'shem hakolel Torah sheba'al peh. V'tam zeh Hashem v'kavanato hu mishnei tzadim. Right, and here's why it's called Torah sheba'al peh. Ha'achad mitzad shenimsar ikar hadvrim halalu l'Moshe b'Sinai ba'al peh. Part of it is because these general principles are given orally to Moshe. V'hasheni machmat sheb'chol zman hadorot hanizkarim lo hursha lehem l'chachmei haTorah lahaniach af davar echad midevarim elu shesifornim b'chtav. Right, and the second reason is because throughout their entire history, it was not allowed for the sages of the Jewish people to put their general practice down in writing. כמו שלא חודשו לעולם לגרוס את התורה שבכתב, כי אם מתוך הספר, וכמו שבאה הזהרה על זאת לחז"ל כפולה ומקופלת באמרם המפורסם, דברים שבכתב, אי אתה רשאי לאמרם בעל פה, ודברים שבעל פה, אי אתה רשאי לאמרם בכתב. Right, so Krochmal brings it all home in relation to that original Talmudic source that we looked at to explain why it's so important to maintain the orality of the oral Torah. And again, it's because of his general analysis of the relationship between law and political leaders, in that it requires a tacit, a habit, a manner of application over and above any codified law, and over above any sort of general principle. So in this first model, Krochmal argues that the oral Torah is a form of political praxis. It's political because it's a law designated for a community in order to maintain its identity through time, and it's a praxis because in order for that to happen, due to changing circumstances, it can never be fully codified. It's something that needs to be done and transmitted as a form of habit rather than something that can be fully written down. The next model that we're going to look at is put forward by Moshe Shmuel Glasner. Moshe Shmuel Glasner is known by his pen name, the Dor Revi'i, because he was a descendant of the Chatam Sofer. But as we'll see, in contrast to the Chatam Sofer, that founder of ultra-Orthodoxy, Glasner has a radical view about halachic change. Interestingly enough, because his view is so radical, he does something which I think we all might be advised to do when we're putting forward a radical idea. He buries it. So the book, the Dor Revi'i, which we're going to read a little bit from, is a commentary on Masechta Chulin. And this is what we're going to read is from the introduction to it. And in this introduction to just a commentary on the Talmud, he tucks in a view of Torah Sheba'al Peh that allows for radical change and adaptation. So he bases himself off of a discussion reading together a verse from the beginning of the Torah and a verse from the end of the Torah. So as we all know, it says in Bereshit, "Vayivarech Elohim et Yom HaShvi v'Kadesh Oto, ki yivo shavat mikol malachto asher bara Elohim la'asot." And God blessed the seventh day and declared it holy, because on it God ceased from all the work of creation, and here's the important clause for our purposes, that He had done. Asher bara Elohim la'asot. At the very end of the Torah, it says, "Ulechol hayad hachazaka ulechol hamorah hagadol asher asa Moshe le'einei kol Yisrael," and all the great mighty and awesome power that Moshe displayed before all Yisrael. And here in the literal translation it says, it reads la'asot, asher asa Moshe, as displayed, but we'll see this is going to be the point at issue. So the Dor Revi'i, Glasner in his commentary, starts by citing this verse from Bereshit, Asher bara Elokim la'asot. And he writes, Vayein bara'ava zal. So if we see in the Ibn Ezra, he interprets, Shepiresh hai la'asot. Right, so he translates in Bereshit, what does it mean, Asher bara Elokim la'asot? Hasharashim b'chol haminim shenatam lahem koach la'asot kidmutam. So the Ibn Ezra, very interestingly, understands Asher bara Elokim la'asot not as just some general description, but as describing a specific thing that God created. And what is it according to Ibn Ezra? It's the power in each species to propagate itself, right? To create something in its own likeness. And there are various questions that other commentators ask on that. And the Dor Revi'i wants to defend Ibn Ezra's interpretation. V'lihani nira l'kayim perush harava. I want to support his interpretation. Aval lo kai al hatoladah hativit, but not according to kind of natural or genetic production. Shemoli bidumelo, So not kind of the pshat in the Ibn Ezra that this is talking about the propagation of species. Elakai al ha'adam, but rather this is talking specifically about human beings. The Perusho, Shemima shebara Elokim, and that is that human beings have the capacity that from which God created, Yaseh Hadam b'sichlo chadashot l'hotzi hakochot hatzifunim b'bria lepulat yadayim. So the human being can use his or her intellect to actualize the powers that are hidden in creation and to bring them into actuality. Right. So he understands Ibn Ezra commenting on Genesis as talking about the human capacity to bring things out of nature. U'ma'od yumtak l'not b'zeh sof haTorah b'tchilata. Based on this understanding, Glasner wants to connect. He says it'll be sweet to connect the beginning of the Torah to its end. Ki kamoshehu b'chachmat hateva, just as it is in natural knowledge, in scientific knowledge, hadam b'sechlo v'tvunato mamsi chadashot min hayesodot hayshenot, just as in natural science the human with their intellect can bring new things out of the old principles, out of nature, kenhu b'chachmat toratenu hakadosha. It's the same thing with our Torah. Kim shamoa b'yashan tishmo b'chadash amru chazal. Because our rabbis, our sages say, if you hear in the old, you will hear in the new. In the Talmud it says, "V'kavanatam shemin haTorah yishena hamtzuya b'yadenu," and their intention in saying this is that in this old Torah that we have, hamityagea ba umamit atzmo aleha, that we toil over and we in fact kill ourselves over, yuchal lahotzi chadash shelo haya od olamim, we can bring out something new that has never been seen before. Ubebchina zu amru zal shakadosh baruch hu hara lemoshe kol ma shetalmid vatik atid lachadesh. And this is what Glasner says the Talmud in that other verse means when Moshe was revealed, even that which a conscientious student will eventually drive. Ki b'koach haya munach b'Torah kol ma shehaya atid l'hitchadesh b'chol dor v'dor. Because everything that is ultimately innovated out of the Torah was already there in potentiality. Skipping. V'zen nirmaz b'divrei Torah kadosha, and this in fact he says is alluded to in the Torah, in the verse from Deuteronomy that we saw before. Ulechol hayad hachazaka, ulechol morah hagadol, shehu nitinat haTorah kiperish Rashi zal. Right, so Rashi understands what is this great and awesome power that Moshe did. This is the Torah. Asher asa Moshe leinei kol Yisrael, that Moshe did before the eyes of all of Israel. Rotzelamar, Glasner explains, she'aseh Moshe b'chtav, that Moshe did something with the writing, kedei she'einei haida, that the eyes of the people, hema ha'amelim b'Torah, those are those that toil over the Torah, yeinu ba tamid v'yidirshu ba al pi hamidot shenimsaru lahem. Right, he showed them how to always look into the Torah and how to draw from it. Hu mamash kimo be'bereshit bara Elokim et hashamayim v'et haaretz. This is exactly like what God was saying in the case of creation. Shebaram umasaram lahadam la'asot l'shchalalam v'lhashbicham midor vador. This, what God is doing with the Torah, what Moshe and God are doing with the Torah, is exactly what God did with the world. That it's given over to the human being to do something with in order to perfect it and themselves from generation to generation. Kain haTorah asher sham Moshe l'fnei bnei Yisrael. So too the Torah, nimsara lahem l'hashbicham uschalam tamid, was given to them in order to perfect them constantly. Va'afilu, he continues, sha'torah chetuma nitana va'aleh ein lahosif u'mimena ein lagra. And even though the Torah is closed and one cannot add to it or take from it, v'amru chazal ve'ela mitzvot k'tiv she'ein navi rashai l'chadesh davar me'ata, right? It says eila hamitzvot to imply that you can't, there's no new prophecy. Kol zeh eina ela shelo lahosif o lagra, right? That is that you just can't add something entirely new. Aval leparsha v'ledarsha notein rishut l'chol beitin hasamuch, right? But to interpret and to derive and to explicate is given to every properly ordained Beit Din. V'gam bazeh hu dumya debriya, And it is exactly like with creation. Degam she'ein b'koach ha'adam livroa yesh me'ayin, that just as human beings can't create ex nihilo, can't make an entirely new creation, rak lemazeg v'lahatich kochot v'yesodot nifradim, al yeh hamsat ha'kishur ha'pneimi v'ne'alam she'beinehem. This is just like in natural science, where we don't create something entirely new out of nothing, but rather we delve into nature and we find those hidden connections, those atomic bonds, those chemical connections, and we exploit them in order to create something entirely new through technology. So too, Glasner says, we do with the Torah. Turning to rabbinic authority, he connects this to the Rambam's view in the Mishnah Torah. V'zeh lashon harambam zal, beperak bet mehilchot mamrim. Beit din hagadol shedarshu b'achat min hamidot kefi ma shenira beinehem shadin kach v'danu din, v'amad achareim beit din acher l'stor oto, harei zeh soter v'dan kefi ma shenira beinav. Shenamar el hashofet asher yeh b'yamim hahem, eincha chayav l'lechet ela achar beit din shebiyamecha. Ad kan l'shono. So the Rambam, in Parak Bet of Hilchot Mamrim, has a very dynamic view of how a Beit Din should relate to one that came before it. If it's an issue of interpreting the Torah, there's continuously the right for a later Beit Din to overturn the ruling of a previous Beit Din. Right? Similarly, Glasner connects this notion of rabbinic authority to this conception of revelation in oral Torah. That as long as it is about interpreting the text, as long as it is about exploiting those connections that dwell within it, continuous change is always permissible and always allowable. So this view, I think, is helpful to think about the oral Torah as a form of technology, which is based off of nature, utilizes science, right, but is constantly adapting and changing to new circumstances. So it has a base that it can never entirely do away from, but one in which there is a potential to expand, and to adapt. The last model I want to look at for this way of moving from the Rin Torah as actuality to oral Torah as from the potentiality that's in the Rin Torah to actualizing it through oral Torah is put forward by Moshe Feinstein. And this, again, is in an introduction to a much more well-known book, the Igros Moshe. But I think the introduction is actually a lot less known than his responsa. Because where his responsa are known for their small c conservatism, in the introduction, he actually puts forward a fairly radical view of interpretation. And he returns us back to that very well-known Agadah about Moshe and Rabbi Akiva, but he asks certain questions of it that we might have missed previously. This is on the first paragraph, just the last bolded words. He says, Shelechora lo muvan lashon kitarim she'amar, v'od kasher she'elat Moshe mima akev. So if you recall in this story, Moshe goes on high and he sees God putting crowns on the letters. Right? And Moshe Feinstein asks, what's the deal with the crowns? Why is it crowns that God is putting on the Torah? V'od kasher she'elat Moshe mima akev. Right? When God is putting on the crowns, Moshe asks him, who's holding back your hand? But that doesn't seem appropriate because, in fact, God is putting something onto the Torah. He's not being prevented from putting something on the Torah. So that's the starting point for, these questions are the starting point for Feinstein's view. And he writes, Aval lefi ma shebi'arti meduyak lashon kitarim shenimsa she'Hashem yitbarach asa et ha'otiyot haTorah lemalachim. The word kitarim is precisely right. Why? Because God makes the letters of the Torah as kings. God is crowning them as kings. Hainu shiaseh hachacham v'yidmeh milta lemilta v'yifsok hadin kifi havanato tam haotiyot shebatorah. Right? Why is that? Because the chacham, the sage, compares one case to the other and derives the law according to the understanding of the letters of the Torah. Ukishayeh machloket yasu kafi havanat rov chachmei haTorah. Right? And when there's a dispute about the meaning of the Torah, right, you go according to the majority. Af she'efshar shelo nitkavnu lahamet, even though they might not have reached the truth, v'lo hayad dat habaruch hu kain, and it wasn't in fact God's intention that they reached. Da Kadosh Baruch Hu natan et Torah liYisrael, shiasu kifi sheyavinu et haktuv v'et hamasor ba'al peh b'Sinai lefi havanatam, v'yoter lo yifrosh v'lo yichra Hashem yitbarach b'dinei haTorah shelo b'shamayim hi. Because God gave the Torah to the Jewish people, that they should do according to what they understand as written there, and everything that's given along with it, according to their understanding. And the Torah, as we know, is no longer in heaven. Ella hiskim, God agreed from the beginning, mitchilat lahavanat v'pirush chachmei haTorah. Right? God, from the outset, agreed to their understanding of the Torah, the understanding of the sages. V'nimsa she'otiyot haTorah heim malachim she'osim kifi ma shemashma mehaTorah l'chach mehaTorah af she'ulai lo hayazek havanat Hashem yitbarach. Right? And so we find that it is in fact the letters of the Torah that reign, that are the kings. Right? Because it's them that the sages of the Torah need to go back to in order to understand it, even if this was not the understanding of God. So interestingly enough, it's neither God who is sovereign, nor the rabbis who have authority, but it is the letters themselves of the Torah, and that's why, in Feinstein's understanding, they are given crowns. With this understanding, he says, V'nicha lashon amra Torah shematzinu b'kami duchte. Mishum da'anan da'anin rak ich omeret haTorah. And here, Feinstein is supporting something that we see in the Talmud, but also I think in Jewish general speech patterns. We constantly say, the Torah says this, the Torah says that, right? And what he's indicating there is that everything that we're saying, right, everything that we're claiming, even if it's not said explicitly in the Torah, it's all linked back to the letters of the Torah. V'chein nicha ma she'ita be'eruvin daf yud gimel al Beit Shammai v'Beit Hillel elu ve'elu divrei Elokim chayim. Right? And with this, we can also understand what it says about the dispute between Beit Hillel and Beit Shammai, about both their opinions being the words of the living God. Dechevan she'yicholin lefarosh b'Torah k'Beit Shammai v'Beit Hillel harei nimsa shenemar kitra vayhu kol zman shelo nitpatlu dat echad b'rabim hacholkim. That so long as we have not actually decided the issue, right, the Torah is in some sense indeterminate between them. Because everything goes back to these crowns of the Torah, but these crowns of the Torah don't say anything explicitly. They carry an indeterminacy of meaning that can issue out into the views of Beit Hillel or of Beit Shammai. V'zeh pirush ma ma'akev shem Moshe sha'al lama oseh HaKadosh Baruch Hu ha'otiyot l'malachim she'yasu kafi mashma'ut ha'chachamim b'lashon ha'katuv ha'musar. Right, and with this we can understand why Moshe asks, who stays or who prevents your hand? Right? He's saying, why are you making the letters kings? Demi ma'akev shetichtov ba'ofen shelo yeh efshar lefaresh rak derech echad ki kvanetecha hamitit. He's asking God, why don't you make everything explicit? Why don't you make everything clear? Why are you crowning these indeterminate letters as the authority? V'lama natata koch melucha leotiyot sheyimsa shelapamim yasu shelo kvanetecha. V'hishiv HaKadosh Baruch Hu mishum she'al yedei zeh yidrosh Rabbi Kiva v'chol hachachamim talin shel halachot shehu hagdalat Torah mima'at hanichtav v'hanimsar. Right, because in this way, Rabbi Akiva and all the other sages can expand the Torah. They can, from the little that's written, right, from these crowns that are indeterminate, they can produce a Torah without limit. V'lechtov harbe kol davar befrat ein kates, right? And to write everything explicitly, there's no end to doing this. She'atorah hu below kates, because the Torah is really infinite. He below kates v'gvul. Right? It has no end and no boundary. Right? So the reason why these crowns, whose meaning is indeterminate, right, are given the authority, is so that precisely because of their indeterminacy, there can be an expansion out from the minuscule that's written to an infinite possibilities of Torah. Bringing this back to earth, to rabbinic authority, Moshe Feinstein writes, "U'me'achar shenitbarer she'amet l'horahu ma shenira lachacham acharei she'amal v'yagia levarer ha'alacha b'shas u'b'poskim kifi kocho u'b'koved rosh u'b'yirat me'Hashem yitbarach shekein yesh l'horot l'masa v'zeh mechayev l'horot." And so, therefore, since the truth of making a judgment is what someone, after they've done the proper effort and looked at the proper sources, decides is what must be done, Gam hachachamim shebador hazeh yesh lahachshivam higiu lahora u'mechoyavim lahorot mishum shehorotam nechshav din emet. Right? Because this is our model for how we move from the Rin Torah to the oral Torah. Therefore, even in our age, those who have expended the proper interpretive effort, whatever they determine, that is the truth of the Torah. They have moved themselves from this indeterminacy to a determinate answer, and this is the truth of the Torah. So Feinstein is giving us a model of how we move, again, from potentiality to actuality, but one whose model is textual interpretation, and in fact the infinite possibilities that are available within a text to be exploited. Let's round up and bring this together. We began by looking at three classical rabbinic positions on revelation and oral Torah. The first was one in which revelation was complete, and the oral Torah is some form of retrieval. The second, really on the other pole, was one where the oral Torah is a continuous process of revelation. Right? The revelation itself is something that goes on forever. The third model, which is the one that we spent the most time with, looking at modern interpretations of, is one where there is a Rin Torah, which has a certain potential within it, and then the oral Torah is a process of realizing that potential. In the modern period, different rabbinic thinkers drew from models from other disciplines in order to understand this movement from potentiality to actuality. Nachman Krachmal offers us this model of political praxis, where since the Torah is the law, a divine law for a community, it requires its leaders to have a certain uncodifiable manner or practice of adapting it and changing it in order to allow the community to continue. Moshe Shmuel Glasner, almost a century later, looks to models of science and technology to understand how there can be potential within something. As we see in the case of natural science, there can be genes, there can be molecules, there can be atoms that are all already there within nature, and it's the job of technology to exploit them in order to further human needs. And he models the oral Torah as similarly relating to the Rin Torah, in that the Rin Torah is just like creation is set, but the oral Torah is exploiting all of these potentials within it. And lastly, we looked at Moshe Feinstein, who, funnily enough, right, looks to this model of textuality and textual interpretation for thinking about the role of oral Torah and halakha. But instead of asking us to try to reclaim the original opinion of God, he argues that the text itself is sovereign. But its sovereignty is one of indeterminacy, right? And the constant effort to determine it is what rabbis today are doing through attempting to derive halakha and apply the written Torah to the contemporary world. Thank you.
Thank you. There's so much great material there. I have a whole page here of thoughts and questions. You all should start submitting your questions too. The whole presentation, especially the way you summed it up at the end, reminded me of how Rabbi Roth is fond of saying that Chazal were really all conservative rabbis. These guys are all conservative rabbis too, right? Do you think?
Yeah. What's interesting, I mean, that, at least, so Mor Nevuchei Azman has actually direct connections to things like Zachariah Frankel's approach to halakha. Glassner and Feinstein obviously kind of associated with different communities, but what's interesting is that they tuck these radical views into these introductions. Moshe Feinstein in his responsa and Glassner really out of the way in this commentary on Chulin, but I think that's significant, that it's there, it's available.
Yeah. All right, Joel Shaman is asking, as we know, Schechter moved authority, or perhaps interpretive authority, from rabbis/leaders to Catholic Israel. Can you comment on this?
Yeah, no, I think that's really interesting, because I think that Krochmal, a good person to compare with Salman Schechter is Krochmal, because they're both interested in historical scholarship. They're both interested in the Jewish community adapting Torah through time. But I think one of the revolutions that Schechter has over Krochmal is democratization. So as you see in Krochmal's discussion, it's really an elitist project, right? This oral Torah is given over to the manhigim that are responsible for applying it. Krochmal is writing in the 19th century in Eastern Europe. Schechter, right, is later into the 20th century. And I think that is one way to think about the continuities and the dispute from people even within the same tradition, like Krochmal and Schechter.
Joel just tacked onto his question, and it was something that I was thinking about a lot too. So the way he put it, he said, further, now that we live in a world where there's no longer an agreement on who is Catholic Israel, where do we go? And I was thinking about this also, right? Most or all of these voices imbue so much authority and freedom to the leaders and the rabbis, whomever's in charge. And obviously we live in a time, maybe not so new, but maybe more so now, where different authorities don't respect the authority of other authorities.
Yeah, so I actually think, counterintuitively, I think that Feinstein is really interesting here. All right, because for Feinstein, it's the text that's sovereign, that has authority. As he recognizes, there's going to be different understandings of that text. But what unites a community is being a community of readers, a community of interpretation. And yeah, we probably don't have his views of who is authorized to interpret that text, or how we come to, if we come to some sort of, or if we need to come to some sort of unanimous conclusion. But I think his idea that in this time where it's hard to think about who is Catholic Israel, seeing it in terms of an orientation to a body of text rather than uniformity of practice is actually quite helpful.
Right. So let me ask you a couple questions I had about Feinstein, picking up on what you just said. So the idea that that the Torah is sovereign, that it's endowed with authority beyond whatever God thought or intended when giving the Torah, it makes me think of two potential risks to that. So one is, does that lead to a separation of a separation between halacha and morality. If we think of God's will as sort of being the good, the right, but we've sort of split those two off. That's one risk that it made me think of. And then another risk it made me think of was, if we kind of elevate Torah above God. Right. I mean, people often accuse us in conservative settings of not talking about God enough. It's like we sort of, eschew God and we're focused. I guess maybe there are two versions of the same question. We're focused more on halacha than on ultimate purpose of halacha or of religious life.
Yeah. No, I think that's a great question. So, I can kind of divide it down into two things. One is this question, even though they're related. One of them is this question about ethics, and the other is about God, although, again, they're related. To start with God, I think that seeing Torah, the model isn't to kind of see Torah as elevated over God, but rather as the meeting point between God and the Jewish people, right? So it's not that it stands above, but it's rather there's input from God, there's input from us, and it's what enables us to encounter God. And I think that's related to this question about ethics, right? So then what happens if we don't encounter God in it, or we don't think we encounter God within it because it seems bad? And I think that's where the focus is on indeterminacy, right? Because what's the wrong way to read Moshe Feinstein, or I guess the wrong way to read back to the Gemara in Menachot, right, is that it's about the pshat of the Torah, right? And that's why I really wanted to focus on the indeterminacy of the Torah, right? It's the Ketarim, and who knows what those mean? And we don't know what they mean yet, all right? A conflict between halacha and ethics requires that we already think we know what halacha says. Right? It requires that there's this thing called halacha, or there's this thing called the pshat of the Torah, and then we're like, oh, there's a problem between here and ethics. But if there's no already existing halacha, or if there's no determinate meaning to the text yet, then halacha and ethics are one and the same thing, meaning they're not separate moments, but there's something. Our ethical reasoning is our halachic reasoning, and our halachic reasoning is our ethical reasoning. Sort
of gives us the freedom to try to discern something from the crowns that ties us back to our sense of morality.
When we're trying to figure out what that crowns mean, our moral and our ethical commitments are part and parcel of it.
Right. Great. Okay, we have a question from Jonathan Waxman. He says, given all the emphasis on orality, how do these scholars deal with the fact that the oral law is now written?
That's great. So thank you. That was an awesome question. So Glassner, and this is just from a historical point. So as I said, Glassner is a descendant of the Chatam Sofer, ultra-Orthodoxy. Glassner is a proto-Zionist. And in other parts of this, of the introduction, which we couldn't discuss today, he starts to think about this question. And the question is, how did the Mishnah get canonized? How do we have the Talmud? And he sees this as a crisis. He sees this as something that was the result of exile, and is something that is b'diavad and non-ideal. And this is carried further by a student of his, Eliezer Berkovitz, who's more well known, that part of returning to coming out of exile is not just the Jewish people coming out of exile, but it's the oral Torah coming out of the exile of textuality. So becoming oral once again. Yeah.
Nice. All right, so on that note, maybe I'll ask you my question about Glassner. So this Torah as technology idea is very cool, sort of the, in both cases, kind of a constant adaptation of the raw material, as it were. So the question that arose for me was, our technological advances are so much more drastic than they ever have been in human history. We have we have a webinar. You'll see the email coming up soon on Danny Nevin's tshuva on genetic modification, right? Things that we now can do in manipulating the raw material that never could have been done before. So I don't know. What are the implications of that for or are there any?
Yeah.
For Torah? Does our contemporary age also kind of give license to make radical, drastic leaps that we didn't in the past?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the example of genetic engineering is helpful because, right, one of the things that we learn with science and technology is that those things that we think are basic, right, so we thought it was just atoms. They were like, okay, at the end of the day, it's atoms, and then the question is, what can we do with atoms, right? And then we realized that there are quarks, right? Or we think human beings are their genes, and then we realize that, well, no, we can actually manipulate genes, right? So I think that's actually even, right? So if we take that understanding and think through it with Glasner, right? That just means that we don't even know how much potential there is in Torah, right? Things that we think, again, and this is similar to what I was saying about Feinstein, right? Things that we think are, okay, the basic building blocks of Torah, and then let's see what we can build with those. That we might even be able to break those down further and to see what their basic constituents are and to build new things with them as well.
Yeah, it strikes me also that you could think of biblical criticism in that way, which may or may not always lead directly to psak halacha, but certainly leads to understandings of the text that we couldn't have accessed in earlier times.
Yeah, certainly.
Okay. David Englander. Does Feinstein make clear what he considers included in oral Torah content-wise, specifically?
Yeah, so I mean, I think he does through, so again, as I said, this is an introduction to the Igros Moshe. So I think he does through doing it, so to speak. But interestingly enough, so the Igros Moshe, one of the most famous Orthodox responsa in the 20th century, in the introduction later on, he denies that they are actually responsa. He says, this is what seems to me after reading these texts is what you should do, and if my reasoning works, if you think I'm right, then you should do it. So I think it's his effort to do exactly what he's describing in the introduction. But I think that he realizes that, that means that this is something which is always contestable, right? Because there's this indeterminacy, and then we argue about kind of how to determine it, and he could be right and he could be wrong.
Right. I just had a passing. We've talked about Feinstein and Glasner. We haven't talked directly about Krochmal. So I had a passing thought that I wanted to see what you thought about it. So, we want these webinars to be not only intellectually stimulating but practically useful. So I was thinking about this parsha coming up, Behar B'Chukotai, and the famous question, Ma'anyan Shemitah Sohar Sinai, and the answer in the Sifra of, all the details. We got the brief version, but this teaches us that all the details of everything are there too. So they could use this Krochmal material for a drasha on this parsha as well. Does that sound right to you? That connection? Yes,
I mean, so going back to our original models, it wouldn't want to be that everything is explicitly spelled out there, right? Because Krochmal wants to say that's impossible.
Yeah.
Right. He wants to say what we get is a certain amount of written material, and then we get principles, and then even more so, even the principles aren't good enough. We have to have kind of a praxis of interpretation that can never be codified. I mean, I think this is really interesting when we think about cultures of education. Right. So even above and beyond kind of the manifest content that we teach to people, we teach them ways of reading texts.
Right.
And I think that's one of, and ways of, and as we said before, Krochmal is really thinking about rabbis and rabbinic elite, right? A way in which a rabbinic elite sees its practice of interpretation.
I had a question for you, actually. Oh, a new one just came in. Okay. Alex Friedman. Use the chat, guys. I see it faster. You're all emailing me. Okay, Alex writes, you speak about the potential for Torah to be interpreted in seemingly endless ways. What boundaries, if any, do these thinkers place on the limits of halachic interpretation?
No, so I think that's a great question. I mean, I think that so let's just think about Feinstein for an example, because he has this, as we said, very indeterminate view. But he very quickly afterwards tries to put a lid on it by talking about going according to the majority, principles like that. And then we get to questions of like who is included within the majority, right? And we know from Feinstein's other writings and from his life that he had very particular views about kind of who makes up that community. But I would suggest that it's detachable from that. And we could think of a larger community having a discussion, and then we would have to think about what issues do we think we need to come to a conclusion and go according to the majority on, and which opinions are we willing to let an infinite number of interpretations bloom, so to speak.
Okay, Joshua Ratner asks, how do these three modern thinkers integrate minhag into their analysis of evolving Torah?
Right. So what's really interesting is that Krochmal, in some sense, puts interpretation in the framework of minhag, meaning that it's not just that we have minhagim of ways of doing particular things, but we also have a minhag of interpretation. Right, and this is part of his idea that it can't be codified. It's the way in which we go about doing things that is passed down and is actually more adaptive because it's practical rather than written. Glasner and Feinstein, I think they have a very sharp distinction between Torah and minhag, and that's not so much of their concern. But I think Krochmal is really interesting in that regard because he doesn't see minhag as just like something alongside halacha or something underneath halacha, but he actually thinks in order to determine halacha, you need minhag. So minhag in some ways takes priority in a certain methodological way over halacha.
Interesting. Okay, so while I wait for the next question, if we get another one, I wanted to just go back to the original sources that you presented. So I wasn't sure if I totally understood, I guess, the nafkamina between these first two, revelation as complete and oral Torah as retrieval, or oral Torah as a continuous process of revelation, because it seems like in both, everything is considered to be equally part of divine revelation, whether the moment of Sinai somehow contains all Torah from then on, or whether the revelation continues to be given by God over time. In each case, Torah Shebaal Peh seems to be equally considered to be part of divine revelation.
Yeah, so I mean, the difference between the first and the second is that in the first, you can say, well, you just got that wrong. One way is like machloket is a real problem for the first model.
Right.
And this is something that's brought out very well by Moshe Halbertal in his book, People of the Book. But machloket is a really big problem for the first one because there's a complete Torah. The oral Torah is part of it. And then the question is like, well, how come there's so much disagreement about it? And so machloket is understood as a process of retrieval. So we're trying to get back to that original thing that was there, and to the extent to which we can't do that, that's a really big problem. Whereas in the second one, there's this continuous unfolding. And the reason why there's disputes now is because revelation is ongoing. Rav Kook uses this model to understand Zionism. Tamar Ross uses this model to try to incorporate feminism within a revelatory context. Right? So there doesn't need to be any sort of attempt to say, oh, this was back in the text. It just can be new revelations done by people like Herzl in the case of Rav Kook.
So which of these?
Yeah.
And all the three modern thinkers brought, you're really assigning to the third view, not to either of those
yes,
first
not to
two.
either of those, to the third view.
Right. Okay. All right. We just have a minute left.
Those are kind of two poles.
Yeah.
One where everything is there.
Yeah.
One in which it's continuously unfolding. And the third model that these three modern thinkers are unpacking, right, is one of unpacking.
Right. Right. Great. All right, so in our last minute, let me put you on the spot.
Yeah.
So if you were going out to a conservative community for a Shavuot scholar in residence, I don't know, what would you want to tell them from this about how we should be relating to Torah today?
Yeah, I would talk about, and I might have already led there, kind of its infinity, and to resist the urge to predetermine it, such that questions, and your question was very helpful, meaning that a lot of the questions that we struggle with, ethics and halacha, for example, right, assumes that we already know what halacha is. And then, right, we have a pshat, or we have some sort of codification, etc. And then we can then go on to ask this very important and pressing question of like, well, what happens if this doesn't square up with what we think is morally right? But what that assumes is that there's already this determined thing called Torah and halacha. And what each of these models, and particularly the ones from Glassner and Feinstein, right, are making us aware is that we don't know yet what Torah is. And that's not and that's because of its vastness and its indeterminacy, and that it's up to us to determine it in particular ways.
Great. Thank you so much. I'm sure that you will be finding a lot of uses for this really rich material. We want to ask you all to just take a moment to fill out the evaluation at the bottom of the screen. We really read your evaluations and use them, so thank you in advance for doing that. We want to wish you a Chag Sameach in advance, and just stay tuned for next year's series of webinars. Thank you so much for joining us, and thank you, Yoni.
Thank you for having me.